Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church.
I'm Luke Edwards, Associate Director of Church Development here at the Western North Carolina Conference. When I was the missions director at Boone UMC, I was surprised at how many folks who tithed to the church were unaware of the missionaries and mission projects that a large percentage of their giving went towards. I have a similar feeling now that I work in the church development office at the conference. A significant portion of the conference budget goes towards developing a promising future for our conference by planting new churches. And yet many members of our conference know very little about our church planters and church plants. In today's episode, we sit down with two of our planters, Reverend Ashley Crowder Stanley of Wellspring Congregation in Asheville, and Reverend Charlie Rivens of the Place Church in Charlotte. We talk about their stories as seasoned members of our conference, how they came to plant their churches, and how the pandemic has changed their ministry. I'm excited for y'all to get to know them both. First, I sat down with Ashley Crowder Stanley to talk about Wellspring Congregation. Ashley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Luke. It's great to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and your story here in the Western North Carolina Conference.
Well, it's kind of a long story. I am a Methodist preacher's daughter, and my father, Richard Crowder, was a pastor in this conference for a lot of years. And so we grew up in parsonages around this conference, from Boone to High Point to Charlotte and all points. And it was a wonderful life. I made so many friends, learned so much about people and life and myself through growing up in United Methodist churches scattered around this conference. So I went to Duke University for undergrad, and while I was there, I got very involved in a peer counseling program at Duke and felt very much like my path vocationally would be in counseling. And I went to Duke Divinity School not to become an ordained minister because I didn't know women could be ministers at that point, but I went to Duke Divinity School to pursue a pathway to being a pastoral counselor. So I took as many classes in that as I could. I did a lot of CPE after Divinity School. But during that time, I did feel a call to broaden my ministry to include ordination. And so I met with the bishop at the time back in 1980, and he was not too keen on ordaining women. And so many of us that I was in school with left this conference and were ordained in other places. Some of us came back to this conference. I moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota with my brand new husband, and he began his training at the University of Minnesota. He's a doctor, and I was ordained in that conference, in the Minnesota Annual Conference, and served my first church there. And then in 1987, we moved back to this conference, and I rejoined the Western North Carolina Conference and began my service in this conference during the late 80s. So it's been a good ride, and I'm so glad things changed enough to welcome women back into the ordained ministry and into local church ministry.
Absolutely. Well, tell us about how you became a church planter.
Over the course of my ministry, I've served established churches, which means that they existed long before I ever got there. And, they had established programs and staff and wonderful people that had a lot of traditions, and I have been so blessed to know them and to love them and to be able to be in ministry with them. Over the past probably 10, 12 years in my ministry, I have become increasingly aware that even within those church congregations, there were people who did not feel welcome. They did not feel confident that if they were authentically who they are, that they would be accepted and loved for who they are. Many of those folks have left those established churches all over the country, and they are either so disillusioned that they won't come back, or they are so hopeful that there'll be a place where they can find welcome and safety and be able to live out their faith in a whole and a complete way. So last year, 2019, when the bishop and my district superintendent, Beth Chrisman, contacted me about a new appointment in an established church that would have been a wonderful place to serve, I felt like if it was going to ever happen, that I tried to live out this dream, it was now. And so I proposed to them that potentially I could have an appointment to start a new congregation, and that it would be an inclusive, welcoming congregation from the get-go. And surprisingly, they said yes. So I became a church planter last summer and had a lot to learn about it. They sent me to church planter boot camp and another week of training here in our conference. And I learned a lot about how when you start a church from scratch, it's very different than going into an established church and trying to fit yourself in. So I had a steep learning curve, and I still do, but it's been so fun, and it has been so filled with joy and wonder. I am so thankful that I have gotten to be a part of this.
That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about your plant. What's the name of it, and how's this first year been going?
So our plant is called, our church is called Wellspring. It is a word that our leadership team decided on because we thought it was a hopeful word. It sounded hopeful. It sounded nourishing. It sounded like it would never dry up. And it's very biblical. I've learned a lot about the places in the Bible that word wellspring is. And in the hymn, Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee, there is this line, wellspring of the joy of living. So it feels like the right word, especially for a community like Asheville, which has a lot of really funky kind of sweet, loving words. So Wellspring Congregation and Inclusive United Methodist Church is our name. We're located in South Asheville in what was the 12 Bones Barbecue restaurant. It is a very cool space that we are renting it, and we have gone in there and cleaned it up. People ask me all the time, can you still smell the barbecue? And not really. People also ask me if we're going to have barbecue when we have communion. And I don't know. I haven't ruled that out completely. Anyway, it's a beautiful, wonderful space that has a great vibe. And we have now made it into a holy space. There's an altar table there with the cross, and there are beautiful banners that communicate messages of grace and peace. And there's a coffee maker because coffee is really important to our leadership team. And sure. It's in a very accessible neighborhood that needs a lot of attention and a strong presence of the church. So we really feel very blessed that this is where this church will start. and hopefully we'll be able to really make a difference in the community around us.
Yeah. So how have things been changed from the pandemic? How's that affected the plant?
Yeah. Well, we worked through the fall to get ready to open, from buying chairs to pencils to coffee makers to toys for the children's area to paper to a sound system. All the things that established churches kind of have in place. We've had to just start from scratch. So we were ready to go. And our opening worship was going to be on Palm Sunday, April 5th. And of course, 2 weeks before, the state went on lockdown. And so we haven't been able to have in-person worship. We pivoted pretty quickly, I think, to realizing that our presence, like so many of my colleagues' churches, our presence was going to be virtual for a while. And so we developed a really beautiful website, and we're doing weekly virtual worship. And we have several small groups that are underway. The interesting challenge for me is that I know who about 30 or 40 people are in my congregation, but there are many more that I have never met. And I'm not sure when I will meet them in person, but they're out there because I hear from them during the week. And they're generously giving money to our church. So it's a strange feeling not to know exactly who's in your congregation, but I have a lot of hope that they are sensing our welcome, our spirit of hospitality and inclusiveness. And when we can get together, we can live that out more effectively. So we're online. That's what our ministry is right now. And we're trying to involve as many people as we can in our weekly pre-recorded services. And that's adding a really nice flavor to them, I think.
That's awesome. What's one of your favorite stories from this past year?
Yeah. There are a lot of stories. A pastor in Florida who has contacted me about something else. He started a new church down there probably 20 years ago. And he told me, he said, there are going to be so many stories that you need to write down so you don't forget them when things get really busy. There are so many stories. But one of them that was so touching to me was last fall in 2019, we had information sessions, and we would just post an invitation on social media, that we're having an information session. Come and just learn about this new church. Let us know what you're hoping for, what you need. And one night we were gathered, and there were probably 30 people there, and we were about to start. And this precious couple came shuffling in, and they were probably 89 or 90 years old. And they sat down. They got there a little late. They left early because they had to get home before it got dark. They never said a word, but they listened intently. And shortly after that information session, I got a letter in the mail that included a very generous gift to Wellspring from this couple who believe in our mission and who had a child who was gay that never felt included in their local United Methodist Church. And that child now is in much older. But this older couple had it in their heart to support a new United Methodist kind of interest that was working to be as inclusive as possible of all people. So I've developed an email relationship with the 90-year-old man. and have offered to come and see him, but I think he's quarantining pretty strictly. So we've emailed each other, and I'm so touched that they want Wellspring to work. So people like their child will have a place.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm fairly new to the church planting world, but been around it enough to see that you bring a very different experience to the table than a lot of church planters. I remember I was at that training with you last year, and you're asking questions about like admin councils and stuff, and just questions that most church planters aren't thinking about. They're the kind of edgy folks that are trying to do as little as possible for the and on the administrative side, and you're digging right into it. So I just wonder how has your experience as a established pastor in like a ton of different churches of different sizes, and your experience as a DS, how has that shaped your work as a planter, and how has that helped? Because I hear such great things about your plant. So I'm curious how that has shaped you and helped prepare you.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. Well, when this all started unfolding, I jokingly said, "But God, I don't have any torn blue jeans, and I'm not 30, and I'm not a guy, and I just don't even know what this is about." But I guess what this proves is that God can call all different kinds of people to all different kinds of work. I've had a lot of experience in churches with a lot of meetings, more charge conferences than I've ever really wanted to go to. But I was trained to take that stuff seriously, the forms and the committees, and make sure the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And so I guess that just is my default position. And so when we were getting all that training last summer, I never heard anybody say, and you need to fill out these forms and have, 18 committees and that kind of thing. And so of course my hand goes up and says, well, how often does the church council need to meet? I think it benefits in that I am very sensitive to the necessity for accountability. The money that supports a new church plant, I've learned this, comes from the conference. It's seed money. The conference pays my salary right now. And so I have, that's coming towards us, and I have the responsibility to be accountable for how the money is spent and how we do our work. So I feel like it probably helps me, but it also could get in my way because I am used to having large committees to run things by. And I'm also used to having a staff to talk to about ideas.
On the flip side of that, what have you been like surprised that like, oh, I like this aspect of planting that you wouldn't have?
Yeah, I mean, really, I like the fact that, in established churches, some of the most wonderful parts of established churches, at least this has been my experience, are the traditions of a local church. On Christmas Eve, we do this, this, and this. Or in October, we always have a fall festival, and at fall festival, we have this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. And these are these kind of traditions that are a little bit carved in stone. I love those traditions, and I think they help a church kind of define itself, and it gives churches something to look forward to. I love them until they become immovable and not reflective of where that congregation is at the time. So one of the things that I have loved about church planting is we don't have any traditions to stumble over. In a year, we'll have a tradition or two, right?
Yeah.
But when you start out, you're not bumping up against things that you don't know are there until you bump up into them. And there aren't any conflicts necessarily that you are walking into. But conversely, there's also not a lot of people there who are, able to teach you and tell you the stories of the congregation. And I love learning the stories of my congregation. So, it's a trade-off. But for me, in this time of my life, it has been so freeing to think creatively and to try to think faithfully about what our traditions need to become and be as we begin to grow this church. They don't have to be what they used to be. They can be something new.
That's awesome. Well, how can someone find your church?
The best way would be to go online and look at wellspringcongregation.org. And on that website, you can find our reconciling ministry statement. We are a reconciling congregation. You can find archived worship services, sermons, some writing that I do and I put up there. You can find our beliefs, what our vision and mission is. And you can also sign up for our weekly announcements. It's not overwhelming. It's just sort of to keep you posted on what we're doing and what we hope to be doing in the next few months. So wellspringcongregation.org. We also have a Facebook page, and that is also Wellspring Congregation.
Awesome. Well, Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your story and the story of Wellspring, and so excited to hear how things continue to grow and just the important ministry that y'all are doing together. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Luke.
Next, I sat down with Charlie Rivens of the Place Church in Charlotte. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for allowing me to share with you about the dream of the place.
Absolutely. Well, can you tell us first a little bit about your story, particularly within the Western North Carolina Conference?
Well, I'm simply just a country boy, grew up in the northern end of Mecklenburg County, in and out of church. I say in and out. My mother kept me in. I was trying to get out, but that's the makeup of my foundational life. I love sports. I love people. I was born and raised in an area that was farmland, so integration happened, but we always intermingle. It's just as kids, some of us didn't understand, and then I had a job as a sales rep with Pitney Bowes and other sales companies, and some kind of way I got shocked, struck, and answered my call.
That's awesome. And tell us about your church plant.
Well, actually, this is the second. The first one I attempted at was South Tryon, but this one I'm a lot more eager to delve into because we are trying to grow one that would be multi-ethnic, multicultural. Talking to my sons, we came to the conclusion that all churches should be inclusive, and I need to define inclusive. Inclusive means a makeup of the community. No one has the right to exclude anyone, and I've yet to meet a person that doesn't have sin. And so, with that being the case, all we need to do is love on people. So, the place we really want to be a loving church. Living under the foundation of the Word of God, And so therefore we must love people even when they offend or attempt to do things that we disagree with. We all have issues. So we just love everybody.
It's awesome. Yeah. So tell us about the kind of original vision, where that came from, and how kind of the place got off the ground that first year.
Okay. It's interesting. Okay. I was almost ready to retire and going. That's probably the best kept secret in the company. And
not anymore.
We had this conversation, and Dan and I talked, and he talked about this, and so I had already started formulating what I wanted ministry to look like. I really love the Methodist Articles of Religion. I love the Methodist, basic guidelines, the Book of Discipline. And so I didn't have a problem with Methodism. I just have a problem with implementation of some of the things that was happening. And I was tired of moving. So when he offered this, we had already entertained the Exodus 15 scripture. You brought them in and planted them on the mountain of your possessions. And the way I interpreted that, okay, you're going to lend me some of your people to be the sub-shepherd, and all I need to do is listen to you. And then the place is right in there. So it was like it was a neon sign. And, oh Lord, that you made your abode the sanctuary, oh Lord, that your hands have established. So for me, that takes all the pressure off of me, except to remain humble, obedient, and listen to the voice of God. And I'm going to say this to you because people take this for granted. The Methodist Church allows us the freedom with the Word of God to have various styles of worship and ministry. And that's the beautiful thing about the Methodist Church. And that's why I stayed. Mm-hmm. And so taking that and then wanting to be multi-ethnic, multicultural, I've always been around Blacks, whites, and Native Americans coming up. So it was easy. I was stationed in South Texas. I knew about that much, a thimbleful of Spanish. So, and being in South Texas, I understood some of the words that were different from school Spanish and the language there. So I could communicate well enough. And so I said, okay, God, you do your thing and I'll do mine. And that's where we are right now. I'm just trying to have a Christian word-based church, loving everybody. And you will hear me say word-based church, loving everybody until you either swallow it and digest it well or regurgitate it and leave it.
That's awesome. So how's it been so far? It's year 3 now?
We're in the second year.
Second year.
I wish conference would erase one after the pandemic. In my mind, I wanted to be at 200 at this point. And we were moving in that direction. And we still have a great following online. We have some small groups that meet. On average, we have anywhere from 25 people on Tuesday night, online Bible study. We have our Monday meetings with different groups, and now we're trying to implement things with small groups. We already have 3 call groups where they're calling 10, 12 people and staying in contact and trying to do some things together, daily devotionals. So we are there, but when people ask me, how many do you have now? I really can't give you a real number because I'm old school Methodist. I'm used to counting heads face to face, not counting what we see online. And so that's a hard question for me to answer now, but I feel healthy financially from the pandemic. Our offerings are up. And hopefully we will continue that.
So what was the plant kind of looking like before COVID? And then we'll get into kind of how it's changed. But what was taking shape before before the pandemic hit?
What I would call a contemporary traditional Black church blend. I have failed tremendously in trying to get other races to come in volumes. We have one here and there. And so if people hear this, I would love for them to come and worship with us 4 or 5 times and see if they like the flavor. And if they like it, stay for 6 months and go back to their church. We can learn from each other. But as we were averaging around 7,500 on our 10:30 worships. It was lively. It was energizing. I would go as far as to say if you attended, or even if you stood on the edge, as some of the people from university would occasionally do, they enjoyed what we were doing. And that's the other thing. University has been a beautiful place to be in partnership with, because they make us feel like family. And I'm saying that so if any other church think about allowing space, and I wish they would, for the Methodist growth, make them feel like family, and then we all can become healthy. So we were growing in the right direction, making some mistakes, doing some things right, and I'm learning how to preach differently. But sometimes they get on me and tell me to be me, but it's really
yeah. So then how have things changed now that, or once the pandemic hit, what changed and what's it looking like now?
Personally, preaching every week to a camera in an empty place was a challenge, but we got through it. You pretend you see your people. I personally try to call, 8 to 10 people every week, and I have a list. I go down. Plus, I have the other 3 teams calling people, and then the music ministry, they have their list, and they call and reach out. And by doing that, now we know that we have a core of about 70. The challenge is we really can't truly say where the growth is until we are back in the building. I can say that, because you have to look at everything. Looking at the givings, we have some people that's giving consistently that were not there before. But technically, I don't claim them until I get them inside the house. But, we're bad. We're okay. Some Sundays online, if you go to Facebook and look at it, you'll see anywhere from 150 to as many as 500. So I guess it's up to my message making sense.
Yeah. So I hear that y'all have a great online ministry. Can you tell us about your online presence and what that looks like, what you do on a weekly basis?
That cliche, God is good. I'm somewhat technical, but not at the extent that they're doing things. We were blessed and fortunate to have Annetta Merrill Kroons to agree to come and lead us with music, and she put together an awesome team of musicians and singers that can really worship, and I say that they worship, and so that's one setback, because they're now, and y'all probably knew all this stuff, they're recording their music in separate places and playing the music and then layering it on top of one another, and that's what you see on Sunday. Time they are not together on stage unless it's an old recording. All of the live stuff is recorded separately, spliced together, and giving us that sound, and it's beautiful. So that part is there, and then we have some chat chiefs that's chatting online to people and making comments, so they can feel like we're used to a call response type ministry. So we're trying to imitate that online with chatting.
I love that. So a chat chief. And how many folks do you have doing that every week?
Now we have 2. We're trying to get up to 4. And then now, since we're using a service, we also we just started using a service because it's really hard. But now, since we're using a service, we can also chat on Facebook. So we're trying to develop some chat sheets for there so that people can feel like they're inactive.
That's great. So I saw that that one of your values is serving outside the walls, studying community cultural nuances, and caring for others. Can you tell me more about the studying community cultural nuances part? What's that look like at the place?
I didn't prompt you to ask that question, but I'm glad you did. Culture differs in different areas of the country. Charlotte is such a melting pot. And so they are accustomed to certain worship styles, certain things. And so old man like me, I had to retool my mind, visiting other churches to see and listen to their language so we can communicate with the different cultures in a way that they would understand, what we are trying to accomplish. And then a lot of times you hear people say, we are inclusive. And inclusive means we include you to come in and be like us. And we feel that we need to understand who you are and do some things to make you feel like this is who I am. I think a multi-ethnic, multicultural ministry need to be multi-ethnic, multicultural. And so if I'm dealing with the Liberians, I need to have some flavor for them and some music for them and have them involved, as well as if I'm dealing with a person from up north, and if I'm dealing from Caucasian, Southern white, I need to have something that they like, as well as the traditional Black church and something. And then you try to blend it all together. And anytime you have a mixed pot of blended things, it seems to taste better. And I think that's what we are trying to accomplish when we say that.
Yeah. I'm a northerner, so I know how different the culture is up there from down here. So you mentioned earlier that you've had some challenges in kind of becoming truly multicultural. Can you say more about that and what you think the source of that challenge is and how y'all are trying to address it?
Well, first of all, let's deal with culture and your worldview. Some of it could be me. Growing up in the South, historically, you've always heard it's harder for white people to come and worship in the Black church because of fear, because of all those because ofs. And so that put a stigma in your mind. And until you release that, you are really not truly inviting them. So that's something that I had to deal with me. And then some of it's real. And so you have to, speak a language and train your people to make people feel welcome. And because real talk, and this is as genuine as I can say it, when whites are the minority, they feel a lot more uncomfortable. I remember being a sales rep, and a lady wanted to go to the old McDonald's cafeteria, and I took her there, and she was terrified. And she asked me, I don't know how you do it, always being the minority. And that rang with me. So I know now I need to make people feel comfortable when they come in. And so as we chip away at that and chip away at my own presuppositions, then we will be a lot more comfortable for everybody. And then working there at University City is great because we also get to deal with different cultures there. I wish the conference would do like they used to do and ask churches to lend one or two persons from their church to come and be a part of the new church start for 3 months, 6 months. So when people come in, they will feel comfortable seeing someone that looked like them. And I think if we did that, it would make it grow much faster and the churches would be a lot more healthier. Not only the new church, but the other churches, because we would learn from one another.
Yeah, that's great. Well, what's one of your favorite stories that's emerged from the place so far in the past 2 years?
One, I don't know. I have a great bunch of people, and so okay. This is one that really stunned me. A gentleman that blows the saxophone. He was from a church, and they wouldn't. He wasn't in the music ministry, and so we were talking, and I told him, "Hey, come over and check us out. I think you would." And he came in, and so when we first met at University City, we had him to play the saxophone, just sort of setting the atmosphere. And one of the guys from University City said, "Where did you get him from? You think we can borrow him sometime?" I said, "No, we don't win. I work against every all the time." And so sometimes you have to check what comes out of your mouth, because if we share on one side, we have to share on the other. So we try to do.
That's awesome. Well, how has planting, so you've planted twice and then you've served established churches. What do you think is the biggest difference between your role in those two? So what's different in planting than it is from serving established church?
Good question. When you plant a church, you pretty much help establish the DNA of that church. When you go in existing churches, especially if the existing church is in a decline or have some challenges, you have to go in like a surgeon and operate first to retool the mindset. But I'm not one to believe that it's easier to plant. I think you have a lot more resources. And I think if we as the conference and New Church Start had plans in place to retool the minds of these churches, once we identified them, I think they would grow much faster because they already have a place in the community. The thing is, we ask this question all the time. If your church was removed from this community, would it make a difference? We have to retool the mindset of the people to know that we need to be of significance here, whether it's mission, whether it's education, working with youth. We need to do something. And the Methodist model has always been out in the community. And so if you have an established church in a footprint, then you look at that footprint and you can, I think you can double it in a year, 18 months. A new church, you have to find them, train them, and it's easier because they come in and you establish from day one, and you don't have those, the word I'm going to use, let's say matriarchs, patriarchs. I'm going to say the strongholds there to try to manage it the way that they've always done it. And sometimes you can't do things the same way. I've never known a fisherman, and I love to fish, use the same fishing lure for 50 years. You have to try something new so you can have better results.
One more question. How can people find you? What's a way that they can connect with the place?
They can find us, first of all, they can go to our website, theplaceumc.org, THEPLACE, umc.org, and they can find us there. If you are a YouTuber, you can go to YouTube and type in The Place or Charlie Robbins and The Place Church Charlotte or Charlie Robbins, and you should see some of the things we have online. We also have a Facebook page, The Place, and you can find us there as well. We would love for you to click and stay in contact with us and send us some information. If you have prayer requests, you can send us a prayer request, whether online watching or you can go to the website, theplaceumc.org, and send in a prayer request, and my prayer warriors and I will we'll reach out and pray with you. We're just trying to be ministry to the world, because the world is our parish.
Amen. Well, thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
I hope this episode has given you a glimpse into the beautiful growing edges of our conference that your apportionments support. If you'd like to learn more about our other plants and planters, you can find the link in the show notes or go to wnccumc.org/meetourplanters. That's wnccumc.org/meetourplanters. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.